Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Wednesday, March 26, 2025. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, Executive Editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior Editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And our contributing editor and columnist and podcaster at the Free Press, Eli Lake. Hi, Eli.
Great to be here, John. Thanks for having me.
So Eli has his take this morning, on the scandal involving the use of Signal for a high-level group discussion of the war or the attack on the Houthis in Yemen by the United States, on which Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor of The Atlantic, was inadvertently included, and revealed the existence of this group and the security lapse that suggested. A lot of different bits of detail as we go into the second day. But Eli, your piece this morning details what you see as an effort to use this event to wage an ideological battle inside the administration between the what you call the restrainers, led by J.D. Vance, and the Hawks, led by Mike Waltz, the national.
I don't even know. Can we call Waltz a hawk in this context?
I don't know. Do you have a term? Do you use?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I
neocon
see him as a
cuck monster who lied his way into war.
I don't want to adopt the categories of my ideological adversaries.
How about highly decorated, war
special
veteran,
ops,
special ops guy who became a congressman, is now and is the brother-in-law of the lead singer of Creed. Very important detail about Mike Waltz. His
That's a strike against him, as I see it. But other than that, I think he's a good guy. Just an interesting detail, and that his sister-in-law, married to the lead singer of Creed, was Miss New Jersey in 2004, and his wife has like 5 PhDs, was herself a combat veteran, and is like unbelievably impressive. So the whole Waltz family deserves a sitcom.
New Jerseyans are like that.
Yeah, New Jersey. All right, so Seth standing up for the Garden State as our Garden State nationalist.
PhDs, special forces. That's
what when you think Cherry Hill, you think special forces, PhDs, and a giant water. When you think Trenton makes the world takes, there's Mike Waltz attempting to actually America makes missiles, and the Houthis take them. And that's Mike Waltz's policy. Okay, Eli Lake, lay out for us. It seems like it's not going to be a successful effort, but that situationally, an effort was made, you think, to target Mike Waltz as the representative of the more aggressive,
or what we used to call the Republican Party.
Okay, the Republican Party, yes.
Right. It's not like the Republican Party. I mean, like, there were debates within the Republican Party.
If you're watching on YouTube, you will note that
in honor of it, here you go.
We have Eli
Governor
wearing
Reagan,
a t-shirt.
vintage Reagan.
Governor Reagan. And the slogan on this t-shirt is "Zip it, hippie." So, yes. Okay. So, Eli, please.
So, Mike Waltz, I don't really identify. I mean, Mike Waltz was kind of offered what I thought was a fair kind of critique of the Biden approach to Ukraine, for example, where I would maybe disagree with him. The difference is that Mike Waltz is you would never hear from him the kind of garbage that you would hear from Tucker that would focus on the the awful character of Zelensky and how he's just a sweaty guy in a tracksuit, all that animosity to that's I think is papering over in some ways, like something weird having to do with Russia. Although I'm not making an allegation there, but my point is that Mike Waltz was not he wasn't with commentary on the Ukraine war. I think he's very strong on Israel. It's just that he's like within the parameters of a normal foreign policy debate. And that is enough at this point, because there aren't really it's not like there are true blue neos in the administration right now. That's enough to kind of get him on the list for the people who I think in some ways are like, this new right that wouldn't mind seeing NATO blow up, that, some of them claim that they want to reserve America's resources to fight China, but I'm sure they would come up with a reason as to why that would be a pointless and stupid war, that really believe that Ukraine is the heart of darkness and corruption, and, I would sort of agree with this crowd on, like, how bad Russiagate was, but then they turn that into like, well, anything you say bad about Putin is just an effort to try to silence, people in the debate and everything like that. And, I remember in 2008, 2012, even 2016, this was a fringe view. And I think it is kind of emerging at this point as a kind of dominant strain. And I brought it up in the context of, if this was really about like protecting, state secrets, then you would have a much bigger problem with Pete Hegseth. And I think Pete Hegseth, by the way, kind of shares a lot of the instincts of the commentary listeners, but he's really close with this guy, Dan Caldwell, who is like, one of the important kind of Elbridge Colby type intellectuals, at least in this, what I call the restrainer movement. So why would
Eli, you're throwing in a lot of names, and you're going second level as opposed to first level. So my point is,
on the first level, my point is that if you wanted to,
Dan Caldwell works for Pete Hegseth at Defense. Yes. Dan Caldwell is the person who is helping to staff the Pentagon.
Well, and now he's a senior advisor. Yeah,
now he's the number 3 in the department.
No, Elbridge Colby is the number 3.
Okay, but he is helping to staff the department. There were these 2 extraordinarily weird appointments at the Pentagon. One, a guy named Michael Domino, who is a sort of conspiratorialist, kind of pretty close to being an anti-Semite, and then a spokesman named Kimberly.
Did she get bounced yet, or is she still?
Has she bounced? But who said.
Leo Frank was
was lynched. The Jew whose murder by a mob in Georgia in 2015 led to the founding of the Anti-Defamation League. And so they're staffing there. So that's the weird. But Hegseth was the most conventionally hawkish of the people on the Signal chat, and then you have Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor. And so it's the 2 of them, and then the voices against them. There's only one real voice against them in the chat, and that's J.D. Vance. But then you say, in response to the release of the news, that there were all these stories, leaks from the White House, unnamed officials at the White House saying that Mike Waltz was an effing idiot. And there are many
it's also
things.
People like Kurt Mills, who is now the executive editor of the American Conservative magazine.
Right. So isolationist Tuckerite conservatives saying nasty things about Mike Waltz, internal quotes saying things about Mike Waltz, suggesting that people jumped on this to see if they could somehow oust Mike Waltz in favor of somebody that they thought would be more
right. And my point is
amenable to their restrainer things.
And my point is only that if you were just looking at it about the severity of the breach, sharing the targeting packages, assuming that, I believe Goldberg is being truthful when he says he didn't publish certain things, is far more of a breach than a fat finger F up, if you will, that you add Goldberg to the chat. Now, what's interesting is if you read like the Twitter of Sean Davis, the publisher of the Federalist, this now becomes not like a mistake because Waltz said, like, I don't know, I never talked to Jeffrey Goldberg. It becomes, oh, you're leaking to Jeffrey Goldberg, which, by the way, is disprovable if you just peruse the Atlantic. You don't find any, scoops about Trump's foreign policy until this thing. So, but leaving all of that aside, and by the way, my understanding is that he was adding people in the chat and that the actual number for the contact of the person he wanted was Goldberg's number. Now, that might have been a mistake when it was entered in his phone. It may have been, who knows. But the point is that is, not great. It's bad, but it gets turned into he's talking to the enemy because the Atlantic was like resistance central, has been resistance central in the Trump era. And instead of it, is it really about like, I can't believe we had this huge breach? It's a huge mistake, even if you're on the text chain and, it wasn't you who brought in Jeffrey Goldberg to share that information on Signal. There is no guidance, by the way, that says you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to communicate if you're a senior official under the Biden administration. Now, the Trump administration, according to the Department of Homeland Security Computer Infrastructure, CISA, you're allowed to use Signal as one of those devices, but there's no like guidance that says you're allowed to use Signal to have substantive conversations and share top secret documents. That's not true. So so nobody's saying anything about Hegseth, who I think, or for that matter, I imagine that the CIA director, John Ratcliffe, is also somebody who you could maybe point the finger at if you wanted to do that. But no, it's all about Waltz, because I think that they just want, and then Trump has a rocky history, as we know, with his national security advisors.
So the only thing we're hearing about and from Hegseth is that he didn't share the specific targets, and that's and he's been denying and insulting and insulting Goldberg and so on. So I agree. There's definitely a sort of formation of defense of him, but Trump seems completely that he's downplaying the Waltz's mistake as well. I mean, Trump's just taking this one like it's no biggie at all. Things happen, You learn from every experience, he said.
I'm not predicting anything, but as somebody who covered this stuff very closely in the first term when I was at Bloomberg, I remember right before McMaster was fired, there were all kinds of statements that came out from Trump saying, I have no problems with him. I mean, you don't know.
That's true.
He is a mercurial.
Isn't Trump's bigger problem with these guys when he thinks they're undermining his foreign policy? I mean, if he thinks that Waltz is genuinely carrying out the Trump agenda, then he really might be quite forgiving about a mistake like this, right? I mean, his problem with McMaster and others was that he felt that they were trying to tie his hands, right? But Waltz doesn't seem to be doing that. Waltz seems to be a good defender of Trump's foreign policy and what he's trying to do. So he
let Mike Flynn go, and he thought, and Mike Flynn was as loyal as you get.
He was, but
because there was so much heat. Unfairly.
That was the first act, right? Okay. That the isolationist, Tuckerist, Putinist right is going after Mike Waltz is interesting, but it's not suggestive of anything other than these fights, which really do boil down to kind of, we must stamp out any version of the right that isn't seeking conciliation with Russia, that wants some kind of a deal with Iran, and that I believe, if you really scratch beneath the surface, was like they were tilting too much toward Israel, or were too nice to Israel, or something like that. Though that is kind of being left to the side in favor of just straight old-fashioned anti-Semitism. It's a kind of weird thing where it's like, well, you can be anti-Zionist without being anti-Semitic, is the old canard. Now the question is, can you be anti-Semitic without being anti-Zionist? And there is some kind of weird effort to play that new card, because people are just talking about, whether how the Jews are manufacturing conspiracies about the Holocaust, and that Jewish businessmen in 1915 raped 15-year-old girls and deserved to be lynched, rather than saying that Israel is a socialist country that we shouldn't be siding with. And
you forgot JFK's kind of assassination.
Oh yeah, and the Jews killed JFK, which is proved by the fact that the documents don't mention Israel. So that means the documents that mention Israel were destroyed. So there is.
Don't be so naive, Kay.
I'm very naive. I'm so naive. But
Who's being naive now, Kay?
That's a good question. So there is that, but then there is this question of whether or not is there actually any real disagreement within the administration, by which I mean there is this conversation for 4 days, and what's indicative is that Vance says, I don't know if we should do this, maybe we should wait a month, we got a lot of other stuff going on, and I hate the Europeans, why are we bailing out the Europeans? And then others say, no, we're not bailing out the Europeans, we're just keeping the shipping lanes open, and we have to keep the shipping lanes open. And Vance is like, okay, whatever, the president may not understand what, where this is going. And then Stephen Miller comes in and says, no, we're going ahead. And that it's not like it was a knockdown, drag out fight. It was like a conversation with people in a room that we got to overhear, in which somebody says, I don't know if we should be doing this. And then a bunch of other people say, oh yeah, we really do have to do it. And then he's like, all right, okay, it's up to you, whatever, as long as everybody's on the same page. So I didn't really see this as like the exposure of a major policy disagreement as yet. I mean, clearly there are lines here that Vance is representing within the Republican or the Trump coalition, and that could get worse over time. And I don't like the signs of the lines, but I think that's actually why the story about the internal politics, there was a big effort to make it a big story yesterday, and it's largely the subject of your piece, but I don't think it's going to get much purchase. The question is, how significant is the security breach? Was it a security breach? How significant is it? What does it say going forward if no one is held responsible? How do you run a government in which senior officials are not held responsible for security breaches that they cause, but then you go after junior officials who do the same thing later on? That kind of thing. There's going to be a hearing today, probably as you're already hearing this, listeners, in the House Intelligence Committee, following the Senate Intelligence Committee's hearing, which was yesterday, in which some of these questions, I assume, will be raised, particularly by Democrats on the Intelligence Committee in the House, who, as you may know, are all just incredibly sane and very full of politesse, and it's, I'm sure, going to be just a lovely hearing that really does credit to the idea of political debate in the United States. But Trump clearly does not want to make a big deal out of this. Like that's where what's different about Flynn and everything else.
He's gonna have to take a different tack now, because now the Atlantic has published the actual operational details of the strikes. And so what seems to have happened is that the guys on the chat and in the Trump administration sort of goaded Jeffrey Goldberg into publishing details that proved that Hegseth had attached actual war plans. The administration says they're not war plans because in posting them earlier this morning, the Atlantic called them attack plans. And so the administration is saying, see, they're attack plans, not war plans. You can't trust Jeffrey Goldberg. But the point is that we now can look and see that, it has literally the minute that F-18s were launching, and then the minute that another strike window starts, and it says in the thing that the target in Yemen was walking into his girlfriend's house or something like that. I mean, we're literally seeing a script. It's almost like reading a kind of movie script in a way, a scene setting. And so they seem to have, by denying this stuff as much as they seem to have dared Jeffrey Goldberg into publishing more of these details. And so now it's a second day story with more details.
Right. But the second,
and it's also to contradict the idea, Hegseth and these guys saying there's nothing classified in it. Whether or not that was classified, the information that we're seeing is obviously very secret.
I mean, it's not only let's face it, two things. One of which is, it's not only classified. I don't mean that somebody stamped the word classified at the top of a piece of paper. These are operational war plans. I don't even know if the word classified does justice to what they are. Because the idea is if they're floating around and the Houthis were competent enough to grab them out of the cloud, then the Houthis could counterattack, hit our forces before we hit and there could be a catastrophic consequence. There is nothing on earth that is more classified than the details of a strike, military strike. There's all the fun memes last night. It's sort of like, what would the group chat have looked like on June 5th, 1944, had it been out and around, or any other, or Agincourt or something like that. Like, this is the one thing on earth you could say, well, lots of things need to be classified because they might compromise sources and methods and all of this. But like, this is an American foreign policy action in the process of going on that, should the enemy get its hold on it, can react in real time and turn it back on you. Hegseth and Waltz both are doing something else, I assume, which is they're not managing the fallout from the story. They're managing Trump. So Hegseth is failing Atlantic with its bad editor, Jeffrey Goldberg, and they're failing, and soon they will fold because they're so failing. They're so failing that somebody who has $40 billion owns them and just every 3 minutes hires another 75 people from the Washington Post to like pack onto their. That's how much they're failing. But they're trying to get the message to Trump.
We can say that has backfired, I think, right? I mean, that's my point. Is that
is it backfired with Trump? It's only backfires, right? It's backfired in the sense that, oh, for God's sake, like you're embarrassing yourself. Now, of course, with Kurt Mills at the American Conservative and Sean Davis at the Federalist and everybody else who is in desperate need of psychiatric commitment, they have whatever it is that they will use whatever they have to hand to say, you see, it's not really a war plan. The Atlantic is now calling it an attack plan. That proves it wasn't a war plan. It's an attack plan, or whatever it is they're going to say to attack the people they hate and defend the people that they like, or not even. Now they have to defend Waltz and Hegseth. I think
by the way, the smarter spin would be this. We've had this problem for years, which is that senior officials get away with breaches of state secrets that mid-level and lower-level people don't.
Right.
This is hardly the first time. Look at how Petraeus got a slap on the wrist when he allowed for his personal diaries to fall in the hands of his biographer and lover, Paula Broadwell. Look at Hillary Clinton. Yeah. Look at Sandy Berger. And you can look at all these things, and they're never punished as severely as, Reality Winter, or, if Snowden was to return to the United States or something like that.
No, or Larry Fred, any low-level official responsible for a security breach who can be
right
found out and prosecuted by the Department of Justice doesn't have a leg to stand on. Now they will have a leg to stand on. I said this yesterday, which is
no, but they could have made this argument before, which is to look at the disparity.
Because they don't want to make the argument, because they don't care.
No, I'm talking about the low-level person who's, and then you could have said this. You could have said this for the last 15, 20 years.
Right.
That there is this
huge... we've never seen something this high in this
is terrible. World. I agree.
I mean, this is just
the Secretary of State having a personal
this is worse
email
than Hillary's emails.
Oh, I agree. But
okay, so this is like the worst security breach
of this kind
probably ever seen.
No, Snowden was worse. WikiLeaks in some ways.
No, okay, but that was a kind of counterintelligence op. This is the Secretary of Defense and the National Security Advisor causing a security breach.
The thing about this is how much worse it could have been.
Right. That's the key.
I don't use Signal, so I don't know. But I was talking to someone yesterday who was telling me that, like, if this, thank God it was only Jeffrey Goldberg, because if it were someone else, Signal uses some codes thing where you can then get into someone else's account or the contacts and so on, and it can sort of spread and branch out. It could have been genuinely catastrophic. That is the issue here. They're going after Goldberg as if He's the worst person to have been
The
accidentally
best
added.
person, yeah.
He's the best person, yeah.
Or he turned out to be, right.
Yeah.
I mean, he
Right.
could have.
It could have been Glenn Greenwald instead of Jeffrey
Yep.
Goldberg.
Yeah, just exactly. It could have been anybody who would have actually revealed the plans on Saturday and then blown the mission. So Goldberg
And or
behaved
blown
responsibly.
the identity of the CIA case officer who was also on the chat.
Right. Okay. So my point is, you're saying they could have gone another way.
Saying the spin could have been, this has been a problem. It's not great. It's early, people make mistakes, but like, let's not pretend we haven't been here before, that kind of thing. And then talk about Sandy Berger, Hillary Clinton, David Petraeus.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
That would have been at least more credible. However,
but as I said,
if you're Pete Hegseth and you believe that, the only audience that matters happen to be goldfish and have no memory and don't care that like the Atlantic's going to then say, okay, you called my bluff. Here it is. You know what I'm saying? Then if you know that your core constituency just won't care, then say whatever you want. I mean, that's almost like we're living in a postmodern era.
And there is no core constituency. There was only Trump. Trump told Hegseth when his nomination was in trouble, you're going to have to fight for it. And Hegseth fought for it. And Trump said, good work. You fought for it.
Right.
Now he gets into trouble. So he's fighting.
Yeah.
And he's fighting by lying. And Trump doesn't look at that and say, there are things you really shouldn't lie about. Trump will lie about anything.
Right.
So Hegseth is like being a good student of Trump's here.
Perfect student. And not just lie. Trump is completely comfortable, and we remember this from the first term, living and operating on a different plane of reality from everyone else. If everyone else sees that war plans were leaked or attack plan, whatever, he is fine saying no, they weren't. That's so it's the very same way he called Zelensky a dictator, and then was asked about it after they had some sort of makeup, and he said, "I said that. I don't remember saying that."
But I mean, look. Let's look at it this way. So if Trump is worm tongue and Hegseth is screw tape, right? That's
great.
Worm tongue is the older, right? Screw tape is the kid.
Yes.
Okay.
No, screw tape is the no.
Screw tape writes the letters.
Yeah, screw tape is like
I'm sorry. So I got it backwards.
Yeah.
Okay. So if screw tape is Trump and worm tongue is Hegseth,
right?
What would be different here is Hegseth trying to show Trump that he's a good student of his methods. But Trump genuinely, I think, believes that unless he gives explicit orders that you're supposed to be worm tongue, he's the only one who's allowed to be screw tape. Like, you can't just go on and he gets to do it. And if you're Sean Spicer or something, you have to say that the inaugural had the biggest crowds on earth. But it's not clear that you can freelance the lying necessarily, or is he going to be proud of Hegseth? It's like, you went out there and you lied through your teeth, and boy, I'm proud of you, because the only people who really care about this are liberals who want to destroy me. I don't actually know the answer to that question. Trump said Mike Waltz learned a lesson, and that's fine with me that he learned the lesson. And I don't know what strikes me is that then there's the question of parsing what Waltz said, which is Waltz said, I don't have a relationship with Jeffrey Goldberg, and I don't know how we got on the chat.
And Goldberg said he met him once, which makes sense because he's a congressman and stuff.
Now, do you know people in your life with whom you have an emailing and texting relationship, sometimes going back 10 years, whom you have never met? I do. Or I met once. I don't think
you think Waltz is leaking to Jeffrey Goldberg.
I think. What do I think? I think that Waltz and Goldberg that Goldberg was in Waltz's Signal phone book, and that he was trying to add somebody else to the chat and
No,
Goldberg.
I don't think that's what it is. And I have some reporting here that I can tell you.
Okay.
What happened was his Goldberg's number was on the contact of the person who was supposed to be added to the chat. So there's a difference.
Okay.
It's not like
I
Goldberg
get that
was.
because I've used WhatsApp, and WhatsApp
Yeah.
uses the phone number system. Okay. So, all right. So then, I mean, so basically what's going to happen is like the world of being a student in AI now, which is to say, if you don't want AI to be writing all of the papers that students in high school and college are going to write, they're going to have to go into a room and write the papers in a room with no internet connection by hand in a blue book. Like we're going back to the early
Skiff
20th.
University.
No, I'm saying right. I mean, you're not. And similarly, they're not going to be able. People aren't. If this is the level of inadvertent screw ups that can happen, maybe we're back to people having to have face-to-face meetings in rooms where things aren't recorded. And like, I'm sorry, but we sort of assumed that was always had. It's like, oh, we're going into the situation room, to have the conversation. Well, now it's like, okay, so Witkoff's in Russia and Vance is going to Europe, and this one's so why can't they just continue to have the conversation? Well, I don't know. That's an interesting question. Maybe they can't because it's too dangerous for like the lives of Americans fighting wars.
No. I in a rare dissent here, John. They do account for this. There are skiffs, and there's something called T-skiffs, which are temporary skiffs.
I know.
And you're not supposed to talk about substantive stuff like this on a Signal group chat. And I think it was a bunch of people who are still getting their sea legs in the administration, namely Hegseth, who just thought, I've got a very busy schedule, and I'm trying to, get everybody sign off on what we're doing here. And he made a huge mistake by putting out that stuff on the Signal where he should have just waited to be in a skiff. I think that's
I'm right. So you're saying practices are probably going to change as a result of this era.
Yeah, but they don't have to invent a new system for only face-to-face.
That's not a new system.
They just go to the old system and follow the old rules and do it that way. And I mean, whatever the interpretation, the idea, by the way, that this guidance allowed them to use Signal for whatever they wanted is just not true. It was like, you can use Signal to say, I'm going to be in Berlin tomorrow. Can you meet? Or something like that. You can't use Signal to like say, these are the target packages for our strikes against the Houthis.
But there's there's one obstacle to going back to the world of the skiffs, which is Trump, right? I mean, we read all those stories about him like taking phone calls from foreign leaders at Mar-a-Lago, like, at dinner, hang on, Xi's on the phone, Xi, you're on speaker, say hi to so-and-so, like he doesn't have a filter in his brain that stops him before he takes actions to ask if that action is safe from prying eyes.
Right, but
he'll pick up the phone and whatever.
Look, you're absolutely right, but the fact of the matter is that not only under our law, but under the literal creation of the system of American government, Trump is the only person in America who is beyond classification. Trump doesn't need a security clearance. He is the security clearance. He can tell anybody anything. He could go on television and say, tomorrow we're going to bomb the Houthis, and here's our plan, and here, it's really cool. Let me show you. And we're going in 12 hours, and he will not have broken any law. He will not have violated any rule. The power of security in the federal government rests in the president himself personally as the executive branch. I know this
from
is
a legal perspective, but I'm saying from a protect our secrets perspective.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
he can still do things that are dangerous,
right.
Even though they're legal. He doesn't have good judgment.
Right.
But,
I wrote about this yesterday, and I think that is essentially the problem, is that he has created a culture in his administration that is so loosey-goosey and undisciplined, and that everyone ends up being some version of that. And by the way he's now handled the fallout is furthering it. I mean, saying, it's no big deal. We learn a lesson. Things happen, and you move on. It doesn't bode well for the future.
So here is Eli wearing the T-shirt of Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan. I'm not going to now lionize Ronald Reagan. It's not what I'm going to do here. But I'm saying, like, Ronald Reagan wouldn't go into the Oval Office without a jacket and tie because he wanted to respect the outward dignity and symbols of the presidency. And he would always wear a jacket and tie, right? 10 years later, Bill Clinton is getting he's like manhandling girls under his desk in the same Oval Office. By which I mean, similarly as Obama says, I'm going to use my pen and phone and create unconstitutional executive orders to further my policies, Trump is the logical conclusion of 17 different steps that took place before he ran for office that made it even conceivable that he could win the presidency in the first place. So the degradation of these standards of behavior and practice, including the way that he got elected, which is Hillary Clinton's handling of her emails, which arguably is the one thing that got him elected. Why did Hillary Clinton behave the way she behaved with impunity with U.S. secrets and taking them home and doing whatever it was that she did? Because her husband got away with Lewinsky Gate. I mean, there is a straight line from one to the other where consequences no longer attach to, as Eli was, don't attach to the big people. And then they start behaving like consequences don't attach to the big people. And then there's Trump, who takes it to another level. But Trump is the result of a process. And now the Trump people in term 2, who aren't people who were in government, a lot of them weren't in government or in the executive branch ever before, whereas in Trump 1, most of the people had been in government before. And yeah.
Okay. I agree with you.
Okay.
You're talking about defining deviancy down.
Yeah.
But just to throw a little bit of a monkey wrench in, there would be some people who would say, I don't know, 40 years ago, how could Americans elect Ronald Reagan when we were having a conversation not so long ago that I remember that we would never support, Governor Rockefeller because he had a divorce. So it's right. There was an argument at the time that Reagan represented in some ways a decline, even though I don't agree with that. But my point is that right. This has been going on even longer than that in some ways.
Well, you can go with Kennedy, right? So,
right.
Okay, so there's a cover up of the fact that John F. Kennedy is sleeping with 19-year-old interns.
Right. Well, but that's different because the public didn't know. But I'm saying that the argument,
when the public came to know, right? In the 70s,
right,
when stuff started coming out about Kennedy's misbehavior in the White House, because there was still the mythology machine around Kennedy, the idea that he had caused a terrible breach
right.
in conduct that should be, that stuff should be caulked and sealed, right? It was more like, what the hell, do whatever you want or something like that. You couldn't have Clinton in the White House having sex if you hadn't had Kennedy in the White House having sex 30 years earlier. I agree. All of this has its own connections. But then we get to 2025 and all these people who are working, Waltz is a congressman, Hegseth was a whatever the hell Hegseth was, Vance has never been the executive branch except that he was a Marine. Ratcliffe was, but I mean, a lot of people aren't experienced. And so if the first term, everybody was following protocols they had learned from working in the executive branch before. Trump didn't abide by them, but they did, and they were horrified, right? John Kelly and McMaster and Bolton and others were horrified by the way Trump breached all of these protocols. But, and now we have people who simply don't have the experience to know. I'll give you an example. Eli's had this experience. I'm sure you've had this experience 10 times. So when I was writing my book Bush Country, which I wrote in 2003 about the second Bush administration, and I was going around the White House interviewing people, and I would go in to see people, and particularly in the sort of like national in places where people had secure documents on their desks or something like that. So at one point, I went to see Scooter Libby, who was, Dick Cheney's chief of staff, and an old friend of mine, somebody I had played softball with in the 1980s. And at some point, Scooter had to step out of the office to see someone or something like that. And he brought in his assistant or secretary to stand
Right, to make sure you wouldn't
by his desk to watch me. He was doing me a favor because it was like, I have to step out, but you can still stay. You can sit.
Right.
You can still sit here. But it's like there were such developed, almost, like theatrical ways in which secrets were protected, traditions, methods of all this informal over time, that they were without, and this happened 4 or 5 different times with 4 or 5 different people. And I assumed that was totally logical or rational. What if you're Pete Hegseth and you've never even seen a classified document before? Now you're Secretary of Defense.
Right.
You never even went through a security clearance before.
Okay, but let me push back. The argument that you could have made a kind of a version of this argument in 1980 or 1976 when Reagan is running. He's an actor. We never had somebody who had like no experience like that before. And then he was a governor, but he's really just an actor. He had a divorce. He tells stories that are probably not true. There were all kinds of of that era versions of this. And yet, I mean, none of us would say that. I mean, it was a wonderful thing for America that Reagan was elected in 1980. And it shook things up, you could argue.
Right.
Now, I'm not necessarily arguing this for Trump, but I'm saying that the argument for Trump is, all these, yes, we've come a long way from the kind of formal culture of Washington, and you spill a little bit of beer along the way, but we need this shake up. We things that the rot had gone too deep.
Right. I am not arguing against. I'm literally just trying to describe what I think happened. I don't. That trying to understand why this happened is not only an argument in experience, as I say, as Abe said, like we dodged a bullet because something worse didn't happen. Particularly if it's a phone number on Signal. Maybe what if the phone number had been, Mohammed Sinwar's? I mean,
right.
So, we don't know how, but the question is, how did it happen? And the answer is, if you want all of this novelty and this different kind of administration with all kinds of, there are going to be negative consequences to it. And then you have the kind of apologists saying there are no negative consequences.
Well,
how dare you even suggest it?
Right. I mean, something about this administration, it sort of cuts both ways in the sense that, well, Trump comes from the business world, and there is, and Musk is involved, and Musk is obviously, among other things, a titan of business and industry. And there has, in the private sector, there's the formalities of organizational practice. There are a lot of them that have encroached, that have become really garbage. I mean, I've worked at places where you've had unnecessary meetings and minute keeping and, this whole sort of culture of management that gets in the way of actually doing things.
Right.
And I'm certain from Trump's perspective and from someone like Musk's perspective, it's like we don't need that. We're and the way Doge operates, clearly they don't observe that. They sleep there. They do whatever. They're just about getting things done, fast and dirty. Don't worry about the all the niceties. The problem is there are certain areas, medicine for one, where you have to observe a rigorous checklist and do things by the book. If you're a airplane pilot, you cannot go by rote. You can't go by memory. You have to go by a checklist. You have to do the right. And if you are in the federal government at the highest levels, you also have to observe this. So they're sort of coming. There are these ideas coming up against each other here. One of which is like slash all this ridiculous conduct that gets in the way of actually of productivity, and that's coming up against no. We have to maintain serious standards here because we're dealing with the most important things in the world.
Look, I think that's a brilliant observation. That's sort of the cult of the managerial McKinseyization of government and everything in America has been a net negative. It exists for reasons that are designed to protect and shield senior managers from the consequences of their own decisions by creating false narratives, in my view, and creating paper trails that keep them from seeming to have their fingerprints on things like mass layoffs or whatever. And that's a real thing. And you do have these two businessmen in Trump and Musk. Trump owning a privately held company, so he does not have, except for his the thing that theoretically got him in trouble with the New York State Attorney General, though of course that case was nonsense. But aside from filing accurate tax returns, it's nobody's business what goes on inside the Trump administration. Musk is different. SpaceX is a publicly traded company, so he does have compliance rules and all of that, but clearly he does not like to be constrained. A lot of senior corporate managers want to be restricted. Like, this is how they got where they got. They used the system, the managerial system, to get themselves to the top of the food chain, and they use it to keep themselves in power, to beat other people down, and that's their superpower in a weird way. And obviously none of that has any benefit in an administration where you have this completely antinomian guy at the top who doesn't like rules and doesn't respect rules and all of that. But where this would fit in with Trump is he has to build a building from scratch. So you know what has to happen? He has to hire somebody who is going to make sure that the steel is strong enough to hold up the 22nd floor, and that all of the corners are level, and that, he's not going to build the building in Pyongyang that's 105 stories that no one can go into, because if you stepped into it, the entire building would fall down. So there is this, incredible skyscraper built by Kim Jong-un that no one can live in or even enter because it's structurally and architecturally unsound. So even Trump has to bow to reality when he's building a building and hire professional people who will follow rigorous rules of the most exacting kinds to make sure that what is completed is whole and good and true and safe and won't get him into trouble on the other end. And that's actually what we're talking about here. The secrets, who cares when they say, oh no, you can't see this rule, this conversation we had at the CDC about how to mask, we're keeping that privileged. But when you're sending American pilot, maybe we wouldn't even say, when you're sending people into potential death, you protect them with secrecy.
Wait, the one difference, okay. You're absolutely right. And in the context of these are being shared before the attack, it's atrocious. At this point, though, their value is diminished because the attack already happened. It's not like a list of... Well, that's why not an agent list.
But that's why Jeff Goldberg didn't do anything wrong. Jeff Goldberg, and that's why it sickens me. I mean, as somebody who's been a critic of the media for my entire career in the media, and has been a critic of Jeffrey Goldberg from the moment that he pusillanimously fired Kevin Williamson so that his woke staff would eat Kevin first and let him survive. He did not interfere in any way, shape, or form with the thing that was exposed to him, which was his moral obligation. I don't even mean it was his professional obligation, or it was his moral obligation.
Citizen, right? Yeah,
because and now there's this claim like, well, if he really were moral, he would have said, "Oh, you included me on this chat. You should exclude me because I shouldn't be allowed to see this." Which is like,
come on,
ridiculous. If you're on a beach, I've been on a beach and like ended up overhearing a whole conversation with a famous painter and talking about his affairs with his girlfriends. Like, I wasn't going to say, "Oh, you know what? I really shouldn't hear this."
Yeah.
Because I'll move away on my towel so that I can't. I was like, it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me.
We always expect journalists to walk away from a story, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, walk away from a story, or like, it's not even it's like just like it just happened that he's sitting there on his email and suddenly these emails come pouring over. Like, I'm sorry, you know.
He thought it was too good to be true at first. He was like, "Are you serious?"
Yeah. Or is this a game? Is someone running a disinformation operation to discredit me or something, or trying to get me in trouble? Yeah, which is, so he thought things through and let it all play out, and then it was only when he heard that the first strike had succeeded that he knew that everything that he had seen was true. It was all trending in that direction, but not until they made it clear that, with the missile hitting Yemen, that it was real,
Yeah.
So 2 days of defense of Jeffrey Goldberg are making me, physically ill. So is there any, all right. Eli.
Yes.
Reported from the Middle East, been all over the place. And Seth, of course, an expert on this, writes for, how seriously are we to take this seeming revolt in northern Gaza against Hamas rule? These demonstrations in Gaza yesterday with people shouting that Hamas needs to leave and they need peace and all of that.
Well, the fact that it happened is extraordinary given the climate of fear that, is in Gaza. I think in some ways it might suggest that Hamas is losing more of its grip than maybe we thought. It's not the first time, by the way. There have been videos from Gaza where we've seen individuals kind of cursing at Hamas officials in food trucks because they're not getting any of the aid. I think it's quite hopeful. And by the way, it cuts against some of the essentialist views of Gaza that we sometimes read. It's true that you can find polling, but how reliable is polling in a territory that's controlled by people that will kill you if they think you look at them the wrong way? Listen, I don't want to get too neocon optimistic. I don't want to give you my whole Sharansky spiel, but I do think that there is. It's obvious that there are probably many more Palestinians who lack the kind of courage of the hundreds of demonstrators that we've seen, that they have to feel the same way. This was such a disaster if you're living in Gaza. There were many crimes that were committed on October 7th, first and foremost against the Jewish people, obviously, and the Jews, and that they murdered and raped and tortured and abducted. But there was also a kind of a crime if you're a Palestinian and you'd like maybe a better life, to start such a reckless war in such a brutal and barbaric way. There had to have been lots of people. And if you remember the original coverage in the Arab world, this faded eventually once the Israeli counterattack started. But the original coverage was, why didn't you consult anybody when you did this? Why did you just go ahead and launch us into this turmoil and this chaos without telling anyone about it? And so that's really the way to get beyond this situation, is that if you have something that emerges that kind of correctly puts the blame on Hamas in this situation instead of defending it.
Hamas is not exactly in a position to come out of their hidey holes.
No.
And mow down the demonstrators, because if they come out of their hidey holes, Israel can can shoot them from the air.
The demonstrators are currently under the protection of the IDF.
Yes.
That's the truth.
Yeah.
Although there has been some reprisals that we've seen.
Individual reprisals.
Yeah. But, as far as it's not, the IDF obviously did not plan protest, but as far as the IDF is concerned, the timing couldn't be better. But a big change happened in January when Israel when Israel reopened north-south travel, right, and allowed Gazans, as part of the ceasefire, to start returning north. There was a moment where they got back to their towns in the north and nothing was there. And they were shocked because they live under a totalitarian government and have nothing but propaganda to eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And they were being told that the Zionists are up against the wall and look what we've done and we've shaken this and everybody's in trouble. They were fed a picture of, if not victory, of something halfway to victory, and they did not know that the extent of the structural damage in the north, and in these residential, and the extent of the structural damage was because Hamas goes into these houses, builds an entrance into tunnels from children's bedrooms. We saw this, hides it behind a toy chest. These are sick people, the Hamas, and fires from these houses, and only felt more free to do so when the houses were empty. And so people didn't realize, and they came back and they understand intuitively, I think, that Israel didn't move everybody out of northern Gaza to smash a bunch of buildings and then go chase Hamas in the south. Like, if you're a student at Columbia, you believe stupid things like that. Like that Israel just lives to bomb houses for no reason. But if you live in Gaza, you understand that there's more going on here. If you live in Gaza, and we've seen the articles from people who have lived there who have said, here's what happened when my family built a new house. At midnight, Hamas people started coming with trucks, and they put up fake walls, and they put up screens and tarp, and they started drilling. And the new house that I was building during the day, Hamas was doing construction on overnight. I mean, people have reported that this has literally happened to them. So Gazans aren't stupid. They understand that Hamas operates from within their homes, and whether or not they supported it before, when they came back and saw, it's the FAFO sort of, this was the finding out part of
Right.
everything. Whether or not they supported before Hamas operating from their houses, we don't know. But when they got back, they saw that these are the consequences of Hamas's way of war. And that really changed. That January moment was a shift. And I'll say one other thing, which is Amit Siegel said this in his newsletter this morning. He mentioned the fact that we're seeing a kind of mirror image of when there are protests in Israel against the government and against the war. You're starting to understand the hopefulness that sparks in the other side. Now, this is complicated because of not saying if you protest against your government, you're a traitor, right? I mean, that's what Hamas is saying. But his point is that you begin to understand why, when certain protests happen in Israel, people in Gaza and Hamas and people in Qatar and Iran and Turkey get excited, and Lebanon get excited, right, that there's internal divisions that might be exploitable. And there's a weird mirror image situation here where they're getting a look at what you feel, how you react when you see the other side, and you go, yeah, go, get out, in the streets against Hamas. And so I think there's a lot of sort of realizations happening both sides of that border.
I'll say this: if this is happening, because it's only a few hundred people, but if this really is happening because Hamas is in worse shape than we had realized, and are less able to punish those who oppose them, and if there are more people who would oppose Hamas if they felt comfortable and safe doing so, then we should start seeing more of this as the war goes on. If that happens, then I think then we're seeing something interesting. I mean, if this becomes something, I don't even want to say like to the level of like what you see in Iran or something.
But that's my concern, is that you can look at this and you could say, well, look at what's going on in Iran, and Iran is perfectly capable, has had these demonstrations on and off now for 25 years, and it just sort of crushes them, or lets them go for a while and then burns them out, or it chokes off any media attention so no one can see it. They're happening. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, not just a few hundred
I mean,
people.
the main difference.
The question is, I think, whether
we weren't taking out the IRGC high command. And so the question is, can they continue to suppress the way they've been able to suppress in the past?
So I don't think myself politically that it represents a change in the fortunes of Hamas with the Palestinian people in Gaza. The question is this a real sign that Hamas is finished? Not that they're willing to rise, but that they're willing to rise up because they feel like Hamas is finished. That there are things that they are hearing and seeing and feeling the difference in the pressure, the internal pressure, as the entire Hamas leadership is now once again being targeted one by one, and which means that Israeli operational intelligence is very real inside Gaza in a way that it wasn't for 10 years. I mean, when they say, we killed this one, we killed that one, we killed this one, we killed that one, that means someone is telling them where these people are, and they're sending a drone or a missile right at their house or at their car and blowing them up. So they now have Gaza penetrated again in a way that they didn't even know about the tunnel system, and that this is something that has conveyed itself to some people in Gaza who are like, all right, the jig is up. Like, this is it. They're going down. We can come out and start saying, get the hell out of here, and see if we can contribute to make this happen a little faster. So I don't think there's going to be like a, citizens revolt, and that they're going to take Mohammed Sinwar and like the Ceausescu's and turn him upside down and pee on him. I do think that, Israel, this is a suggestion that this new Israeli offensive is having real world consequences that are changing the political situation inside the Palestinian polity in some fashion or other, and we'll just have to see how that goes.
There's also an opening here on campus, in a way, in America and the West, which is that, listen, these people in some ways are the grandchildren intellectually of Edward Said. And his big theory was that Westerners will, falsely represented Arab populations or Palestinians in order to dominate them for their own agenda. Well, here you have Palestinians saying, Hamas is the villain. They got us into this war. Screw them. End Hamas. And you have the people who claim to be their advocates acting like what Said would call Orientalists. And that is what they're doing, because these basically they're little props in a play for, Nardine Kiswani and Kuwad and all these people at Columbia, that it's not a reality. Because the reality is that their Palestinians are like, this is you brought a Nakba on our heads here.
Okay, can we talk quickly, and then we need to stop it? Since you brought up Kuwait and Colombia, So your estimable publication, Free Press, and it's one of its star reporters, Maya Sulkin, and others she's revealing
like a comet now.
Yeah. Anyway, are revealing things about what's going on in Colombia and inside the councils of Colombia. So Colombia, of course, capitulated to the Trump administration, gave in and to the authoritarians, and as you know, now they're catamites of the emperor or whatever. And we revealed that there was some kind of private meeting that Katrina Armstrong, the interim president, had, where she said, "Don't worry, we're not going to enforce any of the things we agreed to. We're not going to enforce." So this is now public that she said 24 hours after the agreement that they're not going to abide by the agreement. And then we've seen now, Seth has written about this, and we have seen now on the Columbia campus that Columbia is not enforcing the agreement, that there are masked people wandering around campus having protests, and the agreement said no masks, or if you have a mask, you have to say who you are and take off your mask. And people and Columbia security or whatever aren't doing that. And if you want to talk about FAFO, Katrina Armstrong should not be should not be FAFOing the Trump administration. It
No.
loves this fight.
Oh, yeah.
And it thinks this is an 80-20 issue in the United States. And, if she really wants to have Trump come out and announce that they violated the ceasefire and that there'll be no money for Colombia for another 20 years, sei gesund to her.
Maybe Steve Witkoff can go to Doha and work out a deal with Colombia.
Right. And then, of course, this detail that came out about Nadine Kiswani and Kuwad, which is the group that Mahmoud Khalil manages, and this very pregnant detail that the group was reactivated after being dormant on social media,
right,
just before the October 7th attack started.
Yeah,
minutes before.
This was SJP.
So the signal group,
we're back.
We're back.
Yeah,
we're back, and then the hang gliders.
And also, and I talked about this a bit yesterday on the blog. I wrote about this, some of the revelations in this lawsuit that Nadine Kiswani herself had been using toolkits and talking points that had been circulating, and some of these other groups too. They had been using talking points that had been circulating among the IRGC and had not been released publicly. And then when they released their toolkits, here's what to do on May the 11th, the shutdown for Palestine or whatever. And then after that, the IRGC talking points and the conversations that they were having were leaked. And it turned out that some of these groups were it's like Jeffrey Goldberg in the Signal chat. It's like somebody in the IRGC added Nadine Kiswani to the Signal chat, except purposefully.
Yeah.
They meant to add her so that they could be prepared, to have this stuff. She was using images that was like.
And by the way, book. So just to make clear, and Eli, who has covered this for 20 years, knows way better than I. This is the connecting thread that circumstantial evidence never provides you.
Right.
If they can prove that Kuwad was reactivated.
Well, it would have been Students for Justice in Palestine,
from abroad,
which became Kuwad.
Yeah.
Right.
They can prove that they were activated from abroad.
Yeah.
They're not all going to be deported.
No.
Americans are going to go to jail in the United States.
Yeah.
These are organizations that have been declared by the federal government official sponsors of terrorism, and your cooperation or furtherance of their behavior is a crime.
Yes.
In the United States.
And the group that I'm interested in watching is something that hasn't gotten as much attention. It's called the People's Forum. Yes. They are outside. They show up on Columbia, and they show up at NYU, and they show up at CCNY and so forth. But they was October 8th, literally on October 8th, they had a demonstration. It was, wasn't a lot of people, but they had everything. They were defending it and celebrating it as an act of resistance. And even the loathsome Max Blumenthal, there were you could tell in certain people, but they had everything kind of set to go. People were still trying to figure out what happened, and they were like, "This is a glorious operation. Look, they pointed to some a photo of a Israeli tank or a plane or something that had been, demolished or something." That does suggest a heads up.
And as Eli, as you wrote months ago or a year ago, the conference for Palestine
that's right,
in Detroit that Rashida Tlaib showed up at as a surprise speaker on the last day or the second to last day, whatever it was, and we've both written about this a lot, about that there were, actual celebrations of terrorists there. There were people who from the PFLP who complained that they had to be videoed in to the conference because they couldn't get a visa because they are terrorists, because they are members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the People's Forum. And I think this was where I think I saw this first in your article. The People's Forum hosted the website for that conference. So the People's Forum has been involved with this in a way, and the People's Forum, we should also say, essentially, we're talking about a Beijing propaganda front,
Well,
right?
their main funder
the
is
other
Neville
thing is that
Singh, and he lives in Beijing, and he there's some connection there. Also, there's a group called Breakthrough News, which is very big on YouTube now, that covers all these things. They're totally connected to the People's Forum.
Right.
And
so here, the central point here is that everybody in the United States has rights of free speech. And so you're allowed to celebrate terrorism.
Yeah.
You are fully permitted to celebrate terrorism. You are not allowed to work for a terrorist organization or act in ways that consciously and deliberately, with a connection to that organization, further that organization's aims and goals.
You're certainly not allowed to get money from an organization like that.
And in the course,
you're not allowed to give money to the organization like that. But the question is, like, what is material support in that?
Yeah,
and
there are precedents. The shutdown of something called the Holy Land Foundation in Richardson, Texas, which was revealed to be an arm of. I can't remember who they were the arm of.
It was a Muslim Brotherhood front.
Was
directly working with Hamas.
Yes. The deportation of Sami al-Arian, the professor at Florida International University, who was basically a member of
whose son-in-law, by the way, is a tenured professor at Georgetown, FYI.
Right, and whose wife was at the demonstration, was in the encampments.
And the groups, my point is, like, you are allowed. The groups that it was part of, by the way, the core, each time they shut them down, the core just moved on to another one. So the organizations we're dealing with today are direct descendants of those that are just have been renamed. So we're talking about organizations sanctioned by the U.S. government that have just been basically renamed.
What is so important about this is we're finding out about this not because the FBI is coming out and announcing criminal indictments of these places, right? That's not what's happening. What's happening is private lawsuits filed on behalf of hostages, hostage survivors, and students at Columbia whose rights have been trampled by these groups are surfacing details in these civil suits. Why are they surfacing details in these civil suits? Well, okay, so this is the secondary story that is the story of the next 5 years. There are U.S. attorneys in every major city in the United States. There was an FBI all over America. There are police departments that have counterterrorism wings and units, and all of that stuff taking place outside of red states. Somebody was deliberately looking the other way. If some lawsuit can surface it was 3 minutes before the attack that Kufi came back online, not Kufi, Kuad came back online. So could the U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York. Why didn't the U.S. attorney? Because it was the Biden administration, and they did not want to pursue this. And that's a secondary. That is the narrative that is going to go along with this if we keep going along this road. And the Justice Department just set up this task force to go after, legally, the people responsible for October 7th on the grounds that they harmed Americans, to find their sources, funding, all of that. And this is only the beginning. Right?
Piece of I don't.
Here we go.
No, my only. It's not. No, I'm not doing the First Amendment.
Squishy. Okay, go ahead.
It's not a squishy thing. My only thing is this. We talked about this earlier. The narrative now is that the planning for October 7th was so airtight that not even no one knew about it. Now maybe that we'll find out. Actually, the Iranians knew about it, and so did Hezbollah. And there is some evidence that they talked about a kind of plan, but they didn't know the details of the dates and everything like that. So that's my only thing is that there was we were led to believe that there was incredible operational comm security before this was launched. So it's interesting that it looks like there's a little piece of evidence or a clue that would suggest, no, actually there were networks in the United States that were given a heads up about it as well. That's not just, I'm not doubting it. I'm just saying, we maybe need some more information here because maybe more people.
No, obviously, I said we're going down. We're just down. Starting down.
Yes.
the yellow brick road.
Yes.
I mean, this is the very beginning of the yellow brick road. But the reason that we're starting down it now, at the end of March in 2025, was a deliberate effort not to put your foot on the yellow brick road from October 10th onward.
And now going forward in the future, there may be other ways to learn things that there weren't before, which is that this particular lawsuit that we're talking about, one of the plaintiffs is a former hostage.
Right.
And the hostage says that his Hamas captor told him they were providing material support to these groups on campus, money and other things. Now, we don't know that he's telling the truth about what the Hamas guy said. We don't know if the Hamas guy, if he said that, we don't know if the Hamas guy was. But the point is that as the war has gone on, we're also learning more about the organizations in America. We're not just learning more about what it's like under the surface in Gaza.
Right.
Also, we're getting a peek under the hood of the whole thing.
Right.
That's extraordinary.
Eli Lake, everybody should.
Can I do a quick plug?
Very quick, because we're like so over time.
I know. Cool. Okay. Breaking History is my podcast. If you're not subscribing, please subscribe, leave 5 stars and a nice review. The current episode is great. It's the Baader-Meinhof gang, the most notorious terrorist in West German history, and a comparison with Luigi Mangione. And next episode next week will be about this topic, which is looking at the influence of the intellectual Edward Said on the Tentifada uprising that we saw start in 2023.
Eli Lake's Breaking History. Eli Lake, thank you so much for joining us as usual. And for Abe and Seth, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the camel